welcome to the Design Leaders podcast. Every day I speak with candidates looking to grow in the world of design, development and construction. I also speak with market leaders at the peak of their career who regularly talk about mentorship and helping the next crop of leaders in their own goals and development. How can we help professionals reach these goals in a small but ever-growing industry? Each episode, I want to provide a great opportunity for professionals of all levels to learn from market and thought leaders about avenues for development, areas to focus, how to speak about their project experience, and over time help guide other professionals in their longer term goals and motivations. Today, I'm here with Rick Ward, CTO and co-founder of OrbitsEdge. Rick will go into a little bit more detail shortly, but essentially OrbitsEdge is accelerating the commercialization of space by providing low Earth orbit micro data centers that allow organizations to access and analyze vast amounts of data in space in a quick and efficient way. Rick, I really appreciate you coming on this podcast and welcome.
It's my pleasure. Good to be here.
Appreciate it. So let's get straight into it. I always ask the same question to start off these episodes. So firstly, Rick, how and why did you get into engineering and design?
So my first space job was with a company called Deep Space Industries, and it was asteroid mining. It was a really interesting experience, and it gave me an opportunity to do some of the, I guess you could call it redneck engineering that I'd learned from my dad when I was a kid. And it gave me an opportunity to try out and work on a lot of different and weird and unexpected problems. And I kind of enjoyed it so much, you know, having something that it was constant new stuff, new problems to solve, and you don't really know what's going to come next. And I just enjoyed the iterating. I enjoyed the opportunity to try new things and walk into something not knowing how you're going to do it and end up with something that works.
Interesting. Now, I gave a very brief overview of OrbitsEdge, but do you think you'd be able to give a more in-depth overview of OrbitsEdge and what it is that you guys do?
So the basic idea, there's a lot of companies working to bring modern compute, and modern can mean a lot of different things, into space environments. So up until the past couple of years, it's really been about a 20-year time lag between a processor being fielded on the Earth and making it into space and being trusted in space. And the process is very time consuming and expensive, and it's based on low production runs. So you're looking at definitionally very expensive gear that is still 10 to 15 years after it rolled off the assembly line. So you're not looking at the state of the art. And what we're working on is coming up with ways that we can do an enclosure that does radiation shielding and thermal management. Because once you get into serious levels of compute, every watt that you turn into numbers, you're actually mostly turning that into heat. So removing the heat from the systems is absolutely critical. So we're working on creating an environment that can provide radiation shielding and thermal management so that COTS compute hardware can survive a space environment. And we're working on 3 core products. We're working on a 10-watt product, a 100-watt product, and a 1,000-watt product. The 1,000-watt is getting into the territory of data centers, but the 10-watt, I mean, that's like Jets and Nano territory. That's like Xavier's and some of the AI accelerators that you're seeing come out by Google Coral and a few others. So we're basically creating this system that allows us to fly not full-blown hardware agnostic, but allows us a great variety of things that we can put inside it. And the idea is if there's some sort of new type of hardware that becomes popular, becomes necessary, or is critical for a specific mission, we can work that into our system without having to start over from scratch. We don't like reinventing wheels.
Interesting. Nope. Listen, Rick, most of the time when I speak with at least junior professionals, one of their, goals and their motivations is to work on the more interesting, challenging, complex, and kind of future-focused projects. So I will go into it a little bit later in the conversation of where you'd be able to connect with Rick. But I just want to say, for any junior professional listening who's interested in complex and futuristic design, connect with Rick. You'll see his LinkedIn linked to this podcast. So definitely go ahead and connect with Rick. Looking back in your career, Rick, how do you feel as though your leadership, whoever it might be, would have described you in the early years of your career?
Well, that's actually interesting. So in my previous work, previous space work with Deep Space Industries. Now, in terms of leadership, my start was actually the Marine Corps. So I'm a Marine. I'm an infantryman. That was a really long time ago, and looking back on it, a lot of the ways of treating people and ways of asking things of people placed under me by various circumstances, a lot of that goes back to things I saw in the military, and I don't really think about it so much, but it just kind of happens. Mm-hmm. And I try to treat everybody as fairly as I can, and I try not to ask something that is beyond somebody, but also you have to know what somebody's actually capable of, and ask things that they don't think they can do. But still, you got to treat everybody with respect and pay attention to what's going on and pay attention to interpersonal relationships and everything like that. So how was I seen in the aftermath of DSI? Actually, I had I'm friends with two of the former CEOs we had, and I have a good relationship with both of them. They're both kind of opposite personalities, in that a lot of the people who are friends with one are not friends with the other, and vice versa. But I feel like I'm one of the relatively few people who manages to traverse both parties. I try not to. I don't get into soap opera stuff, but I try and get along with people and work with people on things that are intersectional to our interests. So that's basically. But yeah, I actually still speak to both of them. I ask questions of them at times. I'm hoping to see one of them in the next couple of weeks. The other one, I saw him back in November. So it's relationships are very important. We in the space industry, we have a very small community. I thought the Marine Corps was a small community. It was 100 and some odd thousand Marines, and there were a lot of times that I would see the same guys, not just my unit, but we'd go and do other stuff in other places, and I would keep on running into the same guys, and we're just kind of we're friends for a couple months, and then we don't see each other for a couple of years, and then we see each other for another couple of months or something like that. The space industry is even more so. If you know 100 people in the space industry, your Kevin Bacon is like 2 degrees of Kevin Bacon from everybody else. So it's kind of weird. You can I've even been in situations where I was talking to person A, and I was talking about person B, but I didn't want to name them because it was a thing where it wasn't appropriate. And I was just talking around person B, and A guesses who it is. It's like, you're trying you're trying not to, but it's just such a small sample set. It's really easy to decipher it.
when there's not that many individuals who work in that space, these kind of niche, very, very specialist areas, you're absolutely right. I can't tell you as a recruiter how many times I've talked about someone's background and then the individual I'm talking to has got it nailed on exactly who that person is, whether
Yes.
it's healthcare, laboratories, space, whatever. When it's this very niche and small pool of people who work in the industry, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
But kind of like using a lot of those lessons from those leaders in the past and then kind of taking them further in your career now. How do you think your colleagues, your peers, your employees, the people who work around you now, how do you think they describe you now as a leader?
Oh, geez. What I would like to hear them say is just tenacious. So Napoleon once said that the most important trait in a soldier is not bravery, but endurance. And I think that's the case in a lot of things. So I read once that the average idea is conceived of 50 different times before someone actually turns it into a successful product. And there's a lot of guys dead on the side of the trail with that idea in their pocket for everyone that you see on the shelf, for everyone that you see brought to fruition. And a lot of it is just keeping on going. One more day and there's a water hole. Like if you can not die for one more day and find that water, then you've got enough water to keep you alive a few more days. So, and keep moving forward. That is one of the hardest parts. So another, I guess I'm full of sayings today. If you're convinced that you're going to fail, you're right. If you're convinced that you can succeed, you might be right.
I like that. I've not heard that one. I've heard a couple of the ones that you mentioned. I've not heard that last one there. But I like that kind of belief, right? You if you believe you're going to fail, that's what's going to happen. If you believe you're going to succeed, as you said there, you might succeed. So I like that a lot. What is something, Rick, that you've learned from a leader in your past that you keep with you to this day in your career, and you might even try and factor it into your work on a daily, weekly basis?
I'd have to say one of the big things is don't ask your people to do something you won't do. Nobody can be too big to clean the bathroom. If you take care of your people, they will take care of you. If I have seen this, like you've got a leader and he makes it a habit of hanging his people out to dry. One day he's gonna mess something up and nobody's gonna say a word. They're just gonna wait for it to blow up in his face. And that's just the way it is. So don't do that.
I think, not asking someone to do what you aren't willing to do, it goes across industries, right? It's the same in recruitment. It'll be the same for you guys. It'll be the same for someone who's not in either of our industries listening in. So absolutely, I couldn't agree more. Now, you've probably got a number of them, and I'm going to challenge you to just pick one. If you can't just pick one and you need a couple, that's fine too. But who is a former quality leader of yours or mentor of yours that you really respect, and why?
I like two guys. One would have to be Grant Bonin. He's a Canadian. He's a space guy. He's been through a couple of changes since the last time I spoke to him, so I'm not exactly sure where he is right now. But he's kept on moving in a coherent direction, and that's something that I hold in high regard. There's a lot of people who they lily pad a bit, but they don't really have a direction, and they kind of just randomly left, randomly right, randomly left again. So they're not really getting any specific direction. The other I'd have to say is Dan Faber. I know you said one. Dan Faber. So I like that he is doing that as well. He's so Dan was a Deep Space Industries CEO at one point, and that's space mining. So now his company is Orbit Fab, and that is space refueling. And one of the things that had been identified as a precursor for asteroid mining was you got to have somebody to sell the stuff to. So by creating a refueling capability, that's how you distribute the stuff, the last mile. That is, you get stuff and you give little bits of it to different customers, and then that gives you the last chain in the process, so that you can actually say, I have a quantity of asteroid mined propellant, I can finally sell it to somebody. So, and honestly, OrbitsEdge is about the same thing. So one of the things that I was looking at after my time at DSI was what infrastructure is necessary to enable space mining. That led me to autonomy. And looking at the computers that were available at the time, this was like 2018, we're looking at stuff the equivalent of your iPhone 1. That's not going to push any autonomy. That is not going to do vision processing. It's not going to do proximity operations. It's not going to do any of that stuff. So I looked at what's involved in putting legit computers in space and saw that that process was inadequate. And basically that led to OrbitsEdge, where we're not trying to come up with a new computer. We're trying to come up with a way so that the new computer can work in space. We want to narrow that gap between what just rolled off the assembly line and what is on the launch pad. So yeah, I'd say those two guys, because they're both working in what I would consider to be a coherent direction in the larger mission.
In the larger mission, which it sounds like it's your mission too, so that makes sense.
Yeah, I've heard it said that what you admire in others is either the stuff that you try to have or the stuff that you don't have.
Interesting. You've got some lovely sayings here. I think I need the Christmas cracker that you have on your Christmas day, or whatever you've got that you get those sayings from. I need that.
I have a weird memory. My wife has noticed that if we're watching a Star Trek Next Generation episode, I have seen the episode one time in my life, and today I can quote script from it. Like, I can say what the characters are going to say before they say it, and she's like, "How many times have you seen this?" Like, once when I was 10 or 12 or something like that.
Interesting, the difference between us, because I can do the same with the show Friends, but that's because I've watched each episode probably 10, 15 times, not just the once. Okay, interesting. Now, moving on from your development and your growth in your career, moving into more of a design focus. I always ask this question, and I feel like with you, it's going to be a particularly interesting one. If you could design or build anything, money being no object, what would you be designing and what would you be building with?
I would probably say a semi-autonomous mining rig for space operations. I mean, that's really what I would love to do. I want to. So I'm still intrigued by asteroid mining. After OrbitsEdge becomes successful enough that it's, just a day-to-day thing, that's a grind, I would probably exit and do something else. And if the stars align in the right way, that something else might look like asteroid mining. So what I would love to build, and this is a generational process, and when I say generational, I don't mean human generations of, a 10-year generation. I mean technological generations, which can be more or less time depending on how things shake out. The first phase of asteroid mining is most likely going to be recovering water or other volatiles of that sort for use as propellant and, well, other things. Then the next phase is going to be getting into creating ceramics from the regolith that's left behind, the tailings, as well as possibly metal extraction and possibly trying to extract other useful and easily obtained elements from the minerals. So you can see it kind of like a tech tree, you start out and you can use let's say 10% of the mass of the object, and then the next generation you can use 20% of the mass, and then the next generation you're using like 50%, and then at the end you have like 10% that you're rejecting. That's not what you need for various reasons. And if it's like all the other things, going from the 10% to the 100%, which you would call everything but the squeal, that's going to be like the hardest part. Because you've got things where you keep on climbing the tree to pick the lowest hanging fruit. Eventually the tree is very tall and very slender, and there's not a lot of fruit left. So yeah, I think I would love to build a mining rig. I think that'd be a blast. There's so many different problems associated with it. Additionally, so many constraints. You can't have consumable chemicals because they're just too heavy to truck out there. You can do things by like magnetic, gravitational. There's processes that you can use, but there's a lot of processes that are off the table because they are consumptive. So yeah, I would love to be able to do that because there's just so many different problems to crack.
I knew that'd be an interesting one. I mean, I don't know if you know, Rick, but my connections will know I focus in, advanced tech markets. So we're talking healthcare, space, life sciences, data centers. And whenever I ask these questions to these guests, there's always an array of, an array of answers, all the way from, a sailboat, all the way through to, re-establishing what a health system could be. And I knew asking you that question would come up with something interesting. And asteroid mining, it's not something before this industry I'd ever even thought of, but over the last couple of years I've heard it more and more. So I wish you luck.
I'm also I'd also be interested in some eVTOL stuff. I kind of had an idea for something along those lines like 5 or 6 years ago, and I feel like the tech is getting to that point right about nowish, but I just don't have the time to put into it, even to do design work. I'd love to, but I've got too much on my plate with the OrbitsEdge right now.
Well, it sounds like Rick might be looking for a partner. If there are any people listening out there who might have an interest there too.
Awesome.
But so Rick, I appreciate that. In terms of your favorite project that you've worked on and your role on that project, what are we talking about here?
So we're currently doing some prototype work for OrbitsEdge. That is fine. I'm enjoying that. Obviously I would like that because it's for my baby. It's not for somebody else's. But I can't talk about it so much because it's ongoing. Mm-hmm. So I would, again, roll back to DSI times. There were 2 things that we did that were very interesting to me. One involved a rock crusher that was not intended to go after rocks, the hardness that we were putting through it. and that required a significant amount of strengthening and work to get it to where it would do everything it needed to do. There was a lot of work involved in that. I actually ended up using my blacksmith hammer a bit because I've done blacksmithing before, because that was fun. I ended up working on that, and we made some semi-consumable shielding components to protect some of the things that were simply going to abrade away. Not abrade away, sorry. I enjoyed that. And the other big thing we did a pressure containment vessel. That was a little bit scary in some ways. We had something that was going up to pretty high pressure for something that was kind of sort of home built, and I had to fabricate the thing that held that, and I had to make that so that we could manipulate it, so we could use it, so that everything would work the way it was supposed to. I said that I was not going to do welding on the pressure vessel itself, because I'm not rated for that, and I wanted that part to be done by a certified shop with the proper testing equipment. But I did do the rest of the stuff that we needed for that particular project.
Interesting. Do you think your background as a Marine has something to do with the passion that you have for this space now? Pardon the pun.
It absolutely does. One of the things that I've said, and it took me a little while to realize it, was when I was on active duty, I felt a sense of mission. I felt there was a definite place for me in the world. And I had all my closest friends right there wherever we went. And a bunch of guys I couldn't stand also. But you know what? I also learned how to get along with the guys that I didn't terribly like. So that's also an important lesson. Learning how to get along with people that you are not going to be best friends with because you have common goals. So that was important. So after that, I had other jobs. I had done other things. I'd even had things that interested me. But when I got to DSI, that gave me that sense of mission again. And I felt that I was doing something that mattered. And that was something that had been absent in my life prior to that. And it was something special enough that I couldn't walk away from it again, even after the time at DSI. So, and this is like even a broader sense of mission, I feel. It's not just to the Marine Corps, to the United States of America. It is not even just to humanity. It is to life itself. Like not just the human race, but we have the potential to carry the torch of life beyond this thin blue shell on our planet. I mean, you look at the diameter of the Earth, and the atmosphere is, like, depending on how you measure it, it's like 100 kilometers thick. And then most of the life that we are familiar with is just, a meter below the ground and a few tens of meters above the ground. And then you go into the ocean and you've got that. But you go into the deep ocean, there's very little life out there. The ocean has about as much life as a desert. The places that have all the life in terms of tonnage are the coastal areas. So the places that are relatively shallow, you get into the deeps, and there's not that much life there. You could sink all the way to the bottom, and you would not see a lot of fish in a lot of those places. So it's about building a civilization outside of this planet. That's the ultimate goal. And that is not just humans. It's also, it's also plants, it's also animals, it's also, all five kingdoms. And the viruses will come along with us no matter what we want. It's about taking life to where there is none, which is sublime, also scary.
Scary. Taking life to where there isn't any. It sounds like you might have had, Sunday dinner with Elon Musk or something along those lines. It sounds like a similar sort of mission. Interesting.
So it's funny. I was actually, when I started working for DSI, I was writing a novel about space, and it involved a character that was kind of sort of like Musk, but I started writing this in like 14, maybe 13. Shortly after SpaceX was founded, but before they had actually flown anything. So I found in retrospect that a lot of my hero character, who had basically enabled humanity to become more spacefaring. My hero character ended up resembling Musk a lot, even to the point of being universally disliked in many circles. And basically, in my story, it was anybody who disrupts the status quo to that degree cannot do so and maintain most of his friendships. There's going to be a lot of people who benefit from the status quo remaining status quo, and they will do everything they can to resist that level of change because it costs them power. So yeah, all this stuff that I'm seeing now, I'm like, oh yeah, that's I predicted that. I predicted that a long time ago. So I'm basically expecting everything like this. So in the story, he had, at the point I'm writing it, or was at the point in this scene that this scene is happening, he hadn't been back to the planet in like 10 years, partly because it just wasn't safe for him to go back. So that was kind of how it had worked out. So yeah.
Interesting. Sounds like Rick Ward predicted the rise and potential fall of Elon Musk in the future.
Yeah.
Interesting. Now, we might have already touched on something along these lines because we have touched on a few of your projects here. But what's something that you're particularly proud of in your career that you don't usually get to speak about a lot?
That I don't get to speak about. That's the tricky part. I feel like I don't get to talk about it as much, but we were doing this before anybody else was. We were starting this in conversations in 18, paperwork in 19, and I've seen a lot of people I've seen some people who have basically parroted my pitch. I was like, hey, I've seen that pitch before. I have that PDF. I've seen that, and we have made We have made shifts. We have made, I'm not going to say necessarily pivots, but we have, yeah, we've made shifts. How about that? But we've managed to remain true to the initial mission. It's kind of like no plan survives contact with the enemy intact. So what we were talking about on day one back in 2019 is not the same stuff we were talking about today, but you can see where we got here from there. So being able to listen to customers, being able to listen to criticisms, and come up with something that is a coherent response to those is important. I've known guys who they have an idea and they will push that idea until the day they die and never accept that new technology could make could change any of it. And I've met some of those guys, and it made me sad because you've got, a very intelligent person who is butting his head against a brick wall.
Interesting. Now, moving on from design now, Rick, we're going to touch on some goals. Now, we have in this discussion kind of touched on a few of the goals for both OrbitsEdge and yourself as well moving forward. But just to give a bit of an overview, what are your next goals in the next stage of your career, whether it's about OrbitsEdge, whether it's about you personally and any potential exit in the future? What's the goals moving forward?
So I mentioned tech trees before, and that is my favorite type of video game. On the rare opportunities that I actually get a game anymore, I don't really get to nowadays, but tech trees are my favorite. And I like the idea of unlocking the next one. So what always fascinates me is iterations like 1 through 5. Going to something and saying, hey, I want to do a new thing that hasn't been done before. Okay, let's do one. Okay, it kind of sort of halfway works. Nothing caught on fire. That's a good part, but it's not fantastic. And then we get it to where I'll be charitable towards myself and say that by iteration 5, it's doing pretty much what you want. And then once you get into, 5 through 100, where, the design is pretty much locked in, and you're like, I think we're going to tweak this a little bit, and that's pretty much all we're going to do, and everything's going to be good, and it's going to work great, and we can do this at scale. That kind of bores me. I'm not really that guy. I am the 1 through 5 guy. There's other guys who are really good at, or guys and gals who are really good at, 5 through 100, 100 through 10,000. There's people who are made for that, and they're fantastic. But that I'm not one of them. So basically, I like doing stuff that's new, especially if it's something that's, you're not supposed to be able to figure out a way to do it. And it unlocks other capabilities. That's the big thing. It's got to be another rung on the ladder to get us to where we can see the next piece of empty space that doesn't have a rung.
Well, I look forward, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's, your website, I look forward to seeing in a couple of years, or hopefully even earlier, what that next 1 through 5 might be for you. But interesting there, Rick. In terms of, we're going to look to kind of give some advice to industry professionals. And I think one thing that will be interesting is how you see the industry changing over the coming years. I know we've touched on it previously here, but Normally I ask for that kind of 3 to 5 year timelines. I've got a feeling that might be a bit too soon before there's going to be some real changes. But let's call it kind of in the next decade. How do we think that this industry is going to be changing over the next decade?
So one of the things I've said, and I've had some pushback from very intelligent people on this. So I'm kind of in a mode of internally reevaluating some of this stuff. And also, we've had false starts before, but I feel like we're at a place that's poised for rapid growth. I want to say that space is where the internet was in like 1992 or something like that. People knew what it was. But a lot of Fortune 500s were not, they didn't really see that as their thing. I'm not creating a website about cats, so that's why do I need the internet? And now every company has a very data-driven business model, not just internet, but data as well. And the difference between survival and death and thriving are in large part how you handle your data. So if that's where we are, and then we look at in-space manufacturing, in-space resource utilization, and some of these other things that we're not capable of doing today, but there are serious people working on solutions for them. If we look at those things, there's a place for lots of companies that don't consider themselves to be space companies to have a role in space and utilizing space products. Gosh, I mean, if you think about it, we've already got that. Like your Uber driver uses space technology. It's GPS. It's the same GPS that you use for everything, but it's space technology. There's already elements that are ubiquitous, and we consider them like running water or electricity nowadays, because what would we do without them? I expect to see that expand and grow. I also expect to see some of the aspects of my tiny little community of space to go away as we get to the point where there's more people involved in it than you can realistically meet. So one of my bosses at DSI actually said that for like a 2-year period, he had seen every website on the internet, because he got notifications for every website that came on. And, early on, it was like 2 or 3 websites a day or something like that. And this is global websites that are going live on the internet, 2 to 3 websites a day. It's got to be like 2,000 to 3,000 a second nowadays or something like that. And he would look at every single one of them. Some of them were, of zero interest to him. Some of them were fascinating, but unrelated to his current things. But maybe we're getting past that phase where you just throw in the towel at some point, and you're like, you know what, this is just growing so fast that there's no way I can keep track of it. I'm just gonna silo myself into the things that are actually of interest to me, because I can't spend 18 hours a day seeing the new websites that are coming up, and there's I'm farther behind by the end of the day. So yeah, I feel like I may have answered something that you said. I'm not quite sure anymore.
I think you did. We were talking about kind of what the industry is going to look like over the next decade or so.
Yes.
And I think we've seen a lot of different changes there, and whether you're right or not, I don't know, but I think it'd be interesting to see. But if there's anyone who's listening who's made it to this point and they want to learn more about OrbitsEdge, what can they do? Can they connect with you, learn more about the website? What can they do to learn more about OrbitsEdge?
Yeah, the website is going through perpetual updates, maybe.
Mhm.
But following us on LinkedIn, following the company and myself in particular, either of those work. If someone has something that is relevant, I've had people yelling at me lately that I don't need to just take every meeting request that I get, because again, that takes a certain amount of time. But if someone has something that's relevant and adjacent and stuff like that, I still do a certain number of calls, like one-on-one calls. So yeah, message me on LinkedIn. That's one way.
Well, we will make it very clear when the episode does get shared. We'll include your LinkedIn there so we can make sure people can go directly there. The websites that's going through updates, we'll make sure that's on there as well, to make sure people can find you, Rick. Honestly, for anyone out there, junior professionals, intermediate, even senior professionals, if there's a passion to work on something that's going to define the future of, as Rick said before, not just human life, but life in general. If there's a passion there to be involved in something like that, reach out to Rick. He's,
So I would actually say one thing that's kind of unsolicited. If we are going to have a significant increase in the total number of people working in the space industry, they are not going to all be, pipeline recent grads with either bachelor's or master's or doctorates.
Mhm.
A fair number of them have to be mid-career folks who are transitioning from whatever. Our personal mission here, by doing commercial off-the-shelf hardware, that's to enable space data to more closely resemble Earth data in terms of architectures. One of the things that goes along with that is currently writing code for space applications is really hard. It's super niche-y. The number of people who can do it are nowhere near enough to do everything that people want to do or can even afford to do. Because you're writing for these antiquated little computers. But as we segue into more modern stuff, that enables you to use modern software, modern applications, modern processes, all that stuff. And it's intended to lower the barrier of entry for space operations. And one of the things that can do is allow people who are used to terrestrial data architectures to have greater relevancy for space data architectures, because it ultimately becomes a similar thing. So if there's somebody who is, and yes, this is pretty much all tech people, that's like 100% of the tech world, who has an interest in space, not necessarily with us, we can't take everybody, but find something where your skill set, if this is something that you're serious about, find something where your skill set intersects with something that's needed by somebody in the space industry. Right now, well, okay, a year ago there was a massive shortage of people. Now there have been like 3 massive rounds of layoffs with significant companies, so there's not exactly a shortage of people. The other aspect is, if you want to segue into the space industry, make sure you have a way to eat, because it is not as one of the big sayings we have here is the best way to end up a space millionaire is to start out a space billionaire. So kind of gives you the idea of what the business trajectory is for this life. Yeah, that should have people pounding at the doors to get in.
I think it doesn't sound like it's for someone necessarily who's totally and only focused on being money motivated. It sounds like it's, you know, someone where there's the fulfillment aspect and the passion project for it. That's the certain individual that's gonna, you know, pound on that door that you're
Yeah,
talking about there.
but Maslow does also talk about, you know, food and shelter, and those are handy to have.
Mhm. Food and shelter. I think that last part there, Brick, you know, where kind of, you know, looking at, you know, what it is that you want to do and find an intersection between what's needed in the industry. I think that's going to be really helpful for people out there. So we appreciate that last note there. Brick, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. You know, before I started working in this space, these types of projects, just, you know, I had no idea they were going on. Over the last 2.5 to 3 years, you know, I can't begin to try and wrap my head around what it is that you do on a regular basis. But hearing about the types of projects that go on and what is coming up in, you know, the future of our planet, really, really interesting stuff. So thank you for coming on the podcast. For those listening, as I said before, we are going to make sure that Rick's LinkedIn is attached alongside this. So go ahead and follow, connect with Rick. He'll be someone that you want to see what he's posting and what's going on in the future. I really appreciate it, Rick.
Likewise, I really enjoyed being here. You gave me an opportunity to think about and talk about some things that I really haven't mulled over a lot, at least recently. So it was fun.
Good. I'm glad. I appreciate it, Rick, and we'll speak soon.